Section 26 of Kazan by James Oliver Curwood. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leonard Wilson. Chapter 26. An Empty World. Mile after mile Kazan went on. For a time he was oppressed by the shivering note of death that had come to him in Sandy McTrigger's cry, and he slipped through the bandskins like a shadow, his ears flattened, his tail trailing, his hindquarters betraying that curious slinking quality of the wolf and dog stealing away from danger. Then he came out upon a plain, and the stillness, the billion stars in the clear vault of the sky, and the keen air that carried with it a breath of the Arctic barrens, made him alert and questioning. He faced the direction of the wind. Somewhere off there, far to the south and west, was Gray Wolf. For the first time in many weeks he sat back on his haunches and gave the deep and vibrant call that echoed weirdly for miles about him. Back in the bandskins the big Dane heard it, and whined. From over the still body of Sandy McTrigger the little professor looked up with a white tense face and listened for a second cry. But instinct told Kazan that to that first call there would be no answer, and now he struck out swiftly, galloping mile after mile, as a dog follows the trail of its master home. He did not turn back to the lake, nor was his direction toward Red Gold City. As straight as he might have followed a road blazed by the hand of man, he cut across the 40 miles of plain and swamp and forest and rocky ridge that lay between him and the McFarlane. All that night he did not call again for Gray Wolf. With him reasoning was a process brought about by habit, by precedent. And as Gray Wolf had waited for him many times before, he knew that she would be waiting for him now, near the sandbar. By dawn he had reached the river, within 3 miles of the sandbar. Scarcely was the sun up when he stood on the white strip of sand where he and Gray Wolf had come down to drink. Expectantly and confidently he looked about him for Gray Wolf, whining softly and wagging his tail. He began to search for her scent, but rains had washed even her footprints from the clean sand. All that day he searched for her along the river and out on the plain. He went to where they had killed their last rabbit. He sniffed at the bushes where the poison baits had hung. Again and again he sat back on his haunches and sent out his mating cry to her. And slowly, as he did these things, nature was working in him that miracle of the wild which the Crees have named the spirit call. As it had worked in Gray Wolf, so now it stirred the blood of Kazan. With the going of the sun and the sweeping about him of shadowy night, he turned more and more to the south and east. His whole world was made up of the trails over which he had hunted. Beyond those places he did not know that there was such a thing as existence. And in that world, small in his understanding of things, was Gray Wolf. He could not miss her. That world, in his comprehension of it, ran from the McFarlane in a narrow trail through the forests and over the plains to the little valley from which the beavers had driven them. If Gray Wolf was not here, she was there, and tirelessly he resumed his quest of her. Not until the stars were fading out of the sky again, and gray day was giving place to night, did exhaustion and hunger stop him. He killed a rabbit, and for hours after he had feasted he lay close to his kill and slept. Then he went on. The 4th night he came to the little valley between the 2 ridges, and under the stars, more brilliant now in the chill clearness of the early autumn nights, he followed the creek down into their old swamp home. It was broad day when he reached the edge of the great beaver pond that now completely surrounded the windfall under which Gray Wolf's second born had come into the world. Broken Tooth and the other beavers had wrought a big change in what had once been his home and Gray Wolf's, and for many minutes Kazan stood silent and emotionless at the edge of the pond, sniffing the air heavy with the unpleasant odor of the usurpers. Until now his spirit had remained unbroken. Footsore, with thinned sides and gaunt head, he circled slowly through the swamp. All that day he searched, and his crest lay flat now, and there was a hunted look in the droop of his shoulders and in the shifting look of his eyes. Gray Wolf was gone. Slowly nature was impinging that fact upon him. She had passed out of his world and out of his life, and he was filled with a loneliness and a grief so great that the forest seemed strange, and the stillness of the wild a thing that now oppressed and frightened him. Once more the dog in him was mastering the wolf. With Gray Wolf he had possessed the world of freedom. Without her, that world was so big and strange and empty that it appalled him. Late in the afternoon he came upon a little pile of crushed clam-shells on the shore of the stream. He sniffed at them, turned away, went back and sniffed again. It was where Gray Wolf had made a last feast in the swamp before continuing south. But the scent she had left behind was not strong enough to tell Kazan, and for a second time he turned away. That night he slunk under a log and cried himself to sleep. Deep in the night he grieved in his uneasy slumber like a child, and day after day and night after night Kazan remained a slinking creature of the big swamp, mourning for the one creature that had brought him out of chaos into light, who had filled his world for him, and who in going from him had taken from this world even the things that Gray Wolf had lost in her blindness. End of chapter 26 of Kazan by James Oliver Curwood. Recording by Leonard Wilson of Springfield, Ohio. Section 27 of Kazan by James Oliver Curwood. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leonard Wilson. Chapter 27. The Call of Sun Rock. In the golden glow of the autumn sun there came up the stream overlooked by the Sun Rock one day a man, a woman, and a child in a canoe. Civilization had done for lovely Joan what it had done for many another wild flower transplanted from the depths of the wilderness. Her cheeks were thin, her blue eyes had lost their luster. She coughed, and when she coughed the man looked at her with love and fear in his eyes. But now, slowly, the man had begun to see the transformation, and on the day their canoe pointed up the stream and into the wonderful valley that had been their home before the call of the distant city came to them, he noted the flush gathering once more in her cheeks, the fuller redness of her lips, and the gathering glow of happiness and content in her eyes. He laughed softly as he saw these things, and he blessed the forests. In the canoe she had leaned back, with her head almost against his shoulder, and he stopped paddling to draw her to him and run his fingers through the soft golden masses of her hair. "You are happy again, Joan," he laughed joyously. "The doctors were right. You are a part of the forests." "Yes, I am happy," she whispered, and suddenly there came a little thrill into her voice, and she pointed to a white finger of sand running out into the stream. "Do you remember? Years and years ago, it seems, that Kazan left us here. She was on the sand over there calling to him. Do you remember?" There was a little tremble about her mouth, and she added, "I wonder where they have gone." The cabin was as they had left it, only the crimson bakneesh had grown up about it, and shrubs and tall grass had sprung up near its walls. Once more it took on life, and day by day the color came deeper into Joan's cheeks, and her voice was filled with its old wild sweetness of song. Joan's husband cleared the trails over his old trap lines, and Joan and the little Joan, who romped and talked now, transformed the cabin into home. One night the man returned to the cabin late, and when he came in there was a glow of excitement in Joan's blue eyes and a tremble in her voice when she greeted him. "Did you hear it?" she asked. "Did you hear the call?" He nodded, stroking her soft hair. "I was a mile back in the creek swamp," he said. "I heard it." Joan's hands clutched his arms. "It wasn't Kazan," she said. "I would recognize his voice. But it seemed to me it was like the other, the call that came that morning from the sandbar. His mate." The man was thinking. Joan's fingers tightened. She was breathing a little quickly. "Will you promise me this?" she asked. "Will you promise me that you will never hunt or trap for wolves?" "I had thought of that," he replied. "I thought of it after I heard the call. Yes, I will promise." Joan's arms stole up about his neck. "We loved Kazan," she whispered, "and you might kill him or her." Suddenly she stopped. Both listened. The door was a little ajar, and to them there came again the wailing mate call of the wolf. Joan ran to the door. Her husband followed. Together they stood silent, and with tense breath Joan pointed over the starlit plain. "Listen, listen," she commanded. "It's her cry, and it came from the Sun Rock." She ran out into the night, forgetting that the man was close behind her now, forgetting that little Joan was alone in her bed. And to them from miles and miles across the plain there came a wailing cry in answer, a cry that seemed a part of the wind, and that thrilled Joan until her breath broke in a strange sob. Farther out on the plain she went, and then stopped, with the golden glow of the autumn moon and the stars shimmering in her hair and eyes. It was many minutes before the cry came again, and then it was so near that Joan put her hands to her mouth, and her cry rang out over the plain as in the days of old, "Kazan! Kazan! Kazan!" At the top of the Sun Rock, Gray Wolf, gaunt and thinned by starvation, heard the woman's cry, and the call that was in her throat died away in a whine. And to the north a swiftly moving shadow stopped for a moment and stood like a thing of rock under the starlight. It was Kazan. A strange fire leaped through his body. Every fiber of his brute understanding was afire with the knowledge that here was home. It was here long ago that he had lived and loved and fought, and all at once the dreams that had grown faded and indistinct in his memory came back to him as real living things. For coming to him faintly over the plain, he heard Joan's voice. In the starlight Joan stood tense and white, when from out of the pale mists of the moonglow he came to her, cringing on his belly, panting and wind-run, and with a strange whining note in his throat. And as Joan went to him, her arms reaching out, her lips sobbing his name over and over again, the man stood and looked down upon them with the wonder of a new and greater understanding in his face. He had no fear of the wolf-dog now, and as Joan's arms hugged Kazan's great shaggy head up to her, he heard the whining, gasping joy of the beast and the sobbing, whispering voice of the girl, and with tensely gripped hands he faced the Sun Rock. "My God!" he breathed. "I believe it's so." As if in response to the thought in his mind, there came once more across the plain Gray Wolf's mate-seeking cry of grief and of loneliness. Swiftly, as though struck by a lash, Kazan was on his feet, oblivious of Joan's touch, of her voice, of the presence of the man. In another instant he was gone, and Joan flung herself against her husband's breast, and almost fiercely took his face between her two hands. "Now do you believe," she cried pantingly, "now do you believe in the God of my world, the God I have lived with, the God that gives souls to the wild things, the God that has brought us all together once more, home?" His arms closed gently about her. "I believe, my Joan," he whispered. "And you understand now what it means, 'Thou shalt not kill'?" "Except that it brings us life, yes, I understand," he replied. Her warm, soft hands stroked his face. Her blue eyes, filled with the glory of the stars, looked up into his. "Kazan and she, you and I, and the baby. Are you sorry that we came back?" she asked. So close he drew her against his breast that she did not hear the words he whispered in the soft warmth of her hair. And after that, for many hours, they sat in the starlight in front of the cabin door. But they did not hear again that lonely cry from the Sunrock. Joan and her husband understood. "He'll visit us again to-morrow," the man said at last. "Come, Joan, let us go to bed." Together they entered the cabin. And that night, side by side, Kazan and Gray Wolf hunted again in the moonlit plain. End of chapter 27, and also end of the book Kazan by James Oliver Curwood. Recording by Leonard Wilson of Springfield, Ohio.